Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Digital Evidence. Today's program is hosted by AEquitas. My name is Jonathan Curlin. I'm an attorney advisor with AEquitas, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it into the Q&A box located at the bottom of your Zoom webinar toolbar. Please try to enter your questions in the Q&A form rather than the chat form, as there's a better chance we'll be able to see them. We got a lot of content we want to present today, so if there's time at the end, we'll be answering questions at that time. If we don't get to your question, you're welcome to contact us directly following today's presentation, and we'll send you contact information during our follow-up. For those of you who aren't familiar, and many of you may already be familiar, AEquitas's mission is to improve the quality of justice in sexual violence, intimate partner violence, stalking, and human trafficking cases by developing, evaluating, and refining prosecution practices that increase victim safety and offender accountability. As a national training and technical assistance provider, we develop resources, conduct trainings, and offer 24/7 consultations for prosecutors and allied professionals. For more information on AEquitas, please visit our website at aequitas.org. Today's webinar is part of a webinar series being presented as part of AEquitas's Innovative Prosecution Solutions Initiative, IPS, supported by funding from the U.S. Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Administration. I'm very honored to give you some information about our distinguished presenters for this afternoon. They are Cathee Hansen, Adam Bechtold, and Chris Gray. Let me tell you a little bit about each of their background. Cathee Hansen is a deputy district attorney with the Denver District Attorney's Office and has been specializing in Fourth Amendment law and police procedure since 1995. She spent approximately 20 years at the Colorado Attorney General's office working on criminal cases at the appellate level, helping to develop the law surrounding criminal investigations and providing guidance to law enforcement and prosecutorial offices around the state of Colorado. Ms. Hansen has been with the Denver District Attorney's Office since 2016, where she leads efforts to address both search warrant and digital electronic evidence needs for law enforcement and prosecutor agencies, including the Denver Police Department. With respect to Mr. Adam Bechtold, he is a senior criminal investigator in the Denver District Attorney's Office assigned to the Human Trafficking Unit. Prior to his employment with the District Attorney's Office, he worked with the Denver Police Department for 14 years in the department's gang unit, focusing on investigating crimes that were gang-related or primarily gang-motivated. Mr. Christopher Gray is a crime analyst with the Denver District Attorney's Office. He earned a Master's of Art in Political Science from the University of Colorado at Denver and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Metropolitan State University of Denver. Mr. Gray has worked as a crime analyst with the Denver District Attorney's Office for over 1 year and spent 8 years working at the Denver Police Department as a crime analyst in the Major Crimes Division, working on robberies, homicides, sex assaults, and assisting in other criminal investigations. Mr. Gray has worked with digital evidence from the collection through the trial phases of an investigation on thousands of cases throughout his career. So that is we're very lucky to have these very informed and capable panelists this afternoon. I want to give the floor to them as quickly as possible so we get to hear about just this wide range of content. So I'm not sure which of you is taking point, but at this point, I'll hand it over to you all.
My name is Cathee Hansen. Thank you for that nice introduction, John. My name is Cathee Hansen. I'm a Denver DA. I'm also a digital evidence specialist. That's a role that I took on over the last couple of years because there was a need to really focus on digital evidence in criminal investigations as technology started becoming more advanced. And we wanted to capitalize and be able to use that information in investigations. This webinar was created in an effort to kind of cover the gamut of digital evidence, and we described it from a twinkle in your eye to the end of a trial. Basically, it's separated out in two parts, so there'll be two webinars, and each part, actually the first part has 3 topics, and the second part has 2 topics. The first topic is essentially, you first need to know what's out there. The second topic is how do you collect it properly, and then the third topic is how to search and seize the data that you are dealing with. Part 4 and Part 5 will be covered under the second webinar, and that's how to analyze the data and then how to present it effectively at trial. So topic 1, first need to know what is out there. Can't ask for something if you don't know it exists. So what we're here to do today is talk a little bit in more detail about the types of data that we're dealing with and the types of data that we see that we consider digital evidence. Some people, there's different definitions of digital evidence out there. My definition of digital evidence is basically anything that is on a device or that is captured as part of electronic records. And so what we're going to be talking is in this first part, when we're talking about what is out there, it's a broad overview. It's not intended to get really granular or into real deep dive into any of these specific areas, but just to let you know what's out there. We'll talk about information contained within mobile devices, the data contained outside the devices, such as on service providers or cloud data, tracking data, and IoT and motor vehicle devices as sources of digital evidence. So the first area is digital devices. What we see a lot in almost every case is our cell phones. Cell phones, as we know from the Supreme Court's ruling, cell phones basically contain our whole lives. And so because they contain a big part of our whole lives, they're going to therefore contain a lot of evidence if someone commits a crime. Might be evidence related to their commission of the crime, might be evidence related to their thought process when committing the crime or afterwards, things like that. So we're first going to talk about digital devices and the data contained within the device itself. We'd like to break down this digital evidence source with the cell phones with the first layer, second layer, and third layer data. The first layer data is generally what we're traditionally used to looking at when we're looking at phones, such as calls, phone calls, contact lists, text messages, emails, photos, and videos. Those are the first things that I think most investigators go to, and anybody looking at a phone extraction is going to go to first to see if there's any good stuff in there that will assist in their investigation. So we call that the first layer. The second layer is other things that are on your phone. So these are, you can see this is mostly application data. Not all of it is necessarily out of an app, and some of it crosses over into apps and then system data. But this is a second layer of data that can have different ways of helping an investigation and different ways of corroborating and assisting with that investigation by use of the phone. And the third layer is the metadata, deleted data, and encrypted data that's on a device. So when I talk about first layer data, what we're talking about is mainly these contact lists, call logs, text, photos, and videos. So as you can imagine, this data can include evidence of the crime itself. Oddly enough, when certain people commit crimes, sometimes they take videos of themselves committing the crime. We get this, for example, it's unlawful for them to possess weapons, yet lots of people who are unlawfully in possession of weapons take pictures of themselves possessing those weapons. People take pictures of themselves shooting at a house, things like that. And so the evidence, this first layer data, these sources can be evidence of the crime itself. It also can be evidence related to the crime. So it could be communications that may have been made between certain parties planning the crime itself. Hey, did you get the bag with the masks in it? Things like that. That would be not necessarily the crime itself, but it would be related to the crime. if you're talking about a conspiracy, when you have multiple people, that's when you're really going to get into the text, the call logs, the contact list, because you're going to want to identify who those people were, what role they played in the conspiracy, and how that first layer data can prove up that conspiracy. And then evidence of who was involved, the suspects and the witnesses. So you're going to get that sometimes by the photos and the videos. Who's in that photo? Who's in that video? Can you tell who it is? Who posted it? Sometimes you can tell who it is by who posted it. Sometimes you can't. So all of this data, there's many, many different ways this data, this first layer data can help in an investigation. And sometimes you get lucky and you get that smoking gun. You get that text saying, I'm really angry at my ex-wife, and so I'm going to go over there and I'm going to harm her. And so sometimes you do get that smoking gun out of the first layer data. The second layer data is what we like to look at in terms of the applications. Location data can be in the system itself and also in applications, but you've got social media data, internet history, that's in the device itself, financial app data, health app data, travel app data. These are just some examples. Like I said, a lot of them are applications, and so it's the data that you can get off of a device. And one of the things that I will point out, if you are law enforcement, and we're not exactly sure who is in our audience. If we were in person, I would ask for a show of hands of who's law enforcement, who is an attorney, a prosecutor, and what are the other roles we have here. But one of the things that's helpful just to know for the second layer data, because there's so many applications out there, is if you're trying to figure out if there's an app, what you can get off of it, off of a device. There's a website. It's called NECMEC. Endicac. I'm sorry, Endicac. It's an FBI website. You have to be law enforcement and you have to have a law enforcement portal. But they do have an app catalog that will tell you all kinds of information about these apps, and they also tell you what kind of data you can get off about these apps, whether you're going straight to the service provider or you're getting it off of a device. One of the important things too about this first or second layer data, it's also really helpful for corroboration. I think we look at the phone as this wanting to find that smoking gun, and sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. But phone data can also be really helpful for both corroboration, but also contradiction of perhaps a defense or other state witness statements. It can be corroboration of the criminal offense itself, such as communications that constitute admissions or confessions. It can be internet history, and these are just examples that can show efforts to learn about information related to the criminal activities, such as someone commits a pattern of bank robberies, and then we get their phone and we can see from the internet history they've been following that investigation very closely. That might suggest that they are involved or more likely to be involved because they want to keep track of that and know if the police are onto them. Corroboration can also come in the form of contradiction of statements. So photos, for example, can refute a witness's claim that he or she doesn't know another person. If you have a situation where a witness is saying, I don't know, I've never met this other person, and then you go into the phone and you see pictures of these people together, that can also be helpful to contradict of information that was provided by a witness statement. Then that could be data contained on the phone. And then third layer data, Adam's going to talk a little bit about exactly what it is, but the third layer data is the metadata, the deleted data, and encrypted data. The issues related with this data, it often requires more work to get it out of the device, and it can be inaccessible due to the technology limitations. The benefit is it can show consciousness of guilt by the act of deleting itself. So someone wanting to delete a photo or a video, even though we can and oftentimes get that off of an extraction, the fact that they deleted it shows consciousness of guilt in some situations.
Do I unmute or does she have to unmute me?
So Adam's going to talk a little bit about what is metadata. Adam is our investigator, and he's extremely well versed with Cellbrite and deals a lot with the actual extraction of the data off of the devices.
Good
Good
morning.
morning, good afternoon, everybody.
Metadata.
What is metadata? That's the tag,
right?
right?
That's the
stuff
stuff
that when a file is created,
Kathy, can you
it's
put your,
stamped. The way computers kind of work, and cell phones are computers basically, is it's going to create a log of what happened. So when we think of metadata, we're thinking of the very simple exit information or a picture. We take a picture with our phones, what it's doing is it's going to stamp it. It's going to have a date and a time stamp on it. Sometimes it'll have location information. That's if the device has the location turned on. We can see the potential for that to be huge.
You'll look in and see types of devices used, be it from the phone or
Well, from a camera. A lot of our cell phones now
are using SD cards or micro SD cards,
flash cards. So what we can do is we can take a picture from a cell phone, we can transfer that to another device. Or the converse, we can transfer that device image onto our cell phones. So what it does is we're looking at, we can see what type of information our files contain. We go next slide. So moving forward with this, we have encrypted data. That's something that on our cell phones, we hear that term thrown around a lot, not only just in cell phones, but also in social media applications. It's a big buzzword right now as far as privacy and what that looks like. Yes, there are some terms, MD5, you're hashing. It's ways of looking at encryptions and varying what they are. SHA-256, another hash way of just verifying if something is encrypted. However, what we need to do with encryption is not all encryption is the same. Sometimes it's going to be what we'll call data at rest, means it'll be encrypted on a device. It's not in transit. You have data in motion, which will be encryption that's being transmitted over the bandwidth. That's so providers can't see or hear what's going on during the communications of it. And then we also hear sometimes encryption is not really in play, but yet vendors will throw it out saying, yes, particularly with applications, you'll see this a lot. They'll talk about how their data is encrypted and it's, you can't get into it and all that sort of stuff. But yet really when we look into it, it's nothing more than just talk. It's a sales pitch. So when we hear encrypted data, don't freak out when you hear it. Just kind of do a little bit of research to see what it is that you're looking at and what the level, what the type of encryption is, and then we can kind of go from there.
Sorry, this is Chris. I wanted to talk a little bit about the data that we can find that's outside of the device. So there's several types of data that are available from the service providers and also from the specific applications that are on the phone and also from the cloud storage. Probably most everybody is familiar with what the service provider can give, and that's the call detail records, your SMS messages and your MMS messages, as well as some packet data and other information that can give you location and who contacted who. Generally, that information doesn't give you what the contents of any of those messages are, but the benefit in having that is it's not editable by the user. So when you go to this when you go to the cell service provider, you get information of communications that occurred, and the person that has that service cannot delete those records. And we've seen on several cases in the past where during a criminal conspiracy, somebody will delete the records off their phone, but when we get the records from the service provider, we're still able to find those communications. Within specific applications, we can also find more location information through GPS. We may find social media data through the apps, sometimes financial app data, health app data, and also travel data, similar to what we can get from the phone, but we can go to the carriers to get that. For the cloud storage, we want to look at that sometimes because there may be information that was deleted from a phone, but the phone hadn't been backed up in time for it to delete from the servers. such as an email on your Gmail account, where it would have been deleted from the phone. We don't see it on the dump, but then it's still found within the cloud. So as I said earlier, the call detail records, we find calls that are made or received. We find the SMS. Sometimes a couple of the carriers will have your voicemail content. They may also have SMS content. We have it in all of our search warrants in the event that the carrier does have it. I would suggest putting that in there, but generally we don't see that. We'll also see data events where we know that the phone has been connected to an internet network, and we can see IP traffic, and we can maybe locate, we can try and research that to see what's in there. And then also location data, where we're looking at historic cell site mapping, or either through the cell sites or through other location information. With Google, sorry, I jumped ahead. Data from the applications in your ISPs, we can get app data which is the content, your account information. And with that, we can also, because it's on the phone, and we go after get it from directly from the carrier or from the service provider, then we can attribute and authenticate that information. That becomes extremely important when we're looking at information that we may glean through open source, a portion of the investigation, but we need to attribute it back to a specific person. We find that information on their phone, then we're able to more easily attribute it to that person. Some of the information that you can get out of Google are location history. Google also will give you photographs that are stored on their system, map information that, as long as the user hasn't deleted it, will go back very far. My information in my Google is still in there from 2012. We get the Gmail inbox, IP addresses from where the account was registered, as well as where it accessed the Google services. If your user uses Google Pay or Google Hangouts, we also get that information. And we can also do that. We can start to bleed into more search warrants if we need to get additional information. Facebook has tons of different kinds of information that's in there, and it's constantly evolving. That's one of the bigger challenges because they change so frequently. However, what they generally do have is your messenger data, which is a goldmine of information. And what I mean by that is if somebody is using the text message and then they jump into Messenger, or if they have a phone that doesn't have cellular service, we can still get that messenger information, and we can still see the chat messages and potential phone calls that are being made through Facebook. In order to properly identify the account holder of Facebook, we use facebook.com, and then at the end there's a slash and the rest of the URL. The rest of that URL is unique to Facebook on that day, and that's what we preserve the accounts off of. That's also what we use to issue the search warrants. Many times people are looking for the Facebook identification number. That will work as well if you can find it. There's some challenges, and it's sometimes a little bit difficult, but we have really good luck at getting information from Facebook using the unique resource locator. As far as cloud data, we have a lot of different services. There's iCloud for your Android device, or sorry, for your Apple devices, Dropbox, Google Drive for your Android devices, Microsoft OneDrive, and Nextcloud. Even if we have the device, we may not have all the information from the device. And so we want to sometimes take a look at the cloud to see what other information that we're missing that is stored on the cloud. Many people back their devices up to a cloud service, or they back up several other things to a cloud service, and then they can access it when they need it, but it's not necessarily right there at our fingertips. So we go after that information as well. If you have a case where you believe that some of this information is going to be a part of your investigation, preserve that information as quickly as you possibly can. The information is perishable. Facebook can be deleted, and if it's deleted and we don't know the URL, then it's very, very difficult to go back and find that information. However, if we preserve the account in lieu of a search warrant, once we realize that we're going to issue that search warrant, then we've already got the information that we need, and we can still submit it to Facebook or to any of these other cloud data applications to get the information we're looking for.
Oh, I think we have everyone on mute right now.
And it can also be very helpful for purposes of locating someone who is a witness in another crime, that if we don't find them quickly, we may lose evidence. We may lose if they stole the, for example, there's a homicide and the victim's phone was stolen. Finding the suspect might be very important to find them as quickly as possible so that we can get that stolen phone, because that's going to be evidence. An IP, it's generally called an IP trap and trace. So basically what it is, it's a pinging of an IP. We do that mostly through Facebook or Google. Some other social media applications, it's suggested that they are able to do that. Whether they will or whether they won't is another story. But basically what it is where anytime you're making a connection with your cell phone device to, say, for example, Facebook, it's going to be recording an IP. And that IP address is going to be associated with the particular physical location, or in some situations, a cell phone carrier that's identified by carrier. And so what we do is we do a warrant to Facebook or to Google, and we say, please give us on a regular basis the IPs that are being used to log into this account. And those are recorded by the service provider, and then they're provided to the person who obtained the warrant for them. And this is a little bit more difficult than a pinging. The pinging just gives you the direct location. This has a second step in that you have to take those IP addresses. You can use open source data and make the determination of who owns that IP address. So for example, if it's Comcast, if it's a home router, it's likely gonna then, we're gonna do a warrant for the IP address for that home router, and that will give us then hopefully the physical location of where that person logged into their Facebook account, and it can help us find that person. So it's just another way of tracking someone through their device. There's other location tracking options. These are more historical. And so as Chris talked about, location information is collected with pretty much almost every single internet service provider. I haven't seen almost any, when I'm looking at the terms of service and privacy policy of all these different service providers, that they do not collect location information. There are some, but they're very few. And so if you're looking for location information, like you might be for a cell phone, like you might be with call detail records, you also want to think about using Facebook, looking at Amazon, Snapchat, Twitter, WhatsApp. You can get some location. You may not get content on all of those. So the actual content, for example, with WhatsApp, it's encrypted, so you're not going to get the content of the messages, but you may get the location information, and you can tell where that person was at a particular time. The other type of tracking, in terms of that I still think falls under the digital evidence umbrella, is tracking of motor vehicles. Now, tracking of motor vehicles is a different type of Fourth Amendment search than a search of a motor vehicle. Search of a motor vehicle, of course, requires probable cause to believe there's evidence of a crime or contraband in the vehicle. Tracking of a motor vehicle, so GPS trackers, the case law does say that the Supreme Court has said you generally need a warrant for that. There was some question about how long, if you're doing the GPS tracker, you need a warrant. We always recommend, regardless of how long you're doing it, you should get a warrant for it. You also want to make sure you get authorization to install, monitor, and maintain that tracker, even if you have to do so on private property. I actually, at the beginning of my career, had a warrant that I was trying to defend in the appellate courts, and it authorized the installation of a GPS tracker on a car, but it didn't authorize monitoring it. So it was fortunately not something that the defense had challenged, and so we somehow squeaked by the skin of our teeth. But it's always important to make sure when you're tracking motor vehicles by trackers, you get permission to both install it and maintain it, and if you need to get on private property to do so. The question of whether you can monitor a vehicle that goes out of state is really up in the air. It's not an area that has a very clear answer in the federal law. And I know in Colorado, we don't have a specific case law on that. So what is generally done is spot monitoring. So if you have a type of crime where you're investigating that has a GPS tracker on a car and it leaves the state, you might spot monitor it to see, but don't monitor it 24/7 until it comes back into the state. And then the last thing with this is kind of the more innovative type situations, vehicle location tracking. Rental companies can often have GPS in their vehicles, and they can monitor their vehicles remotely. Private onboard systems such as OnStar and BMW, they have their own location systems where they could track live. And there's also, cars are becoming so complex, or they're already so complex. There's a lot of SIM cards on board a lot of vehicles, and there is some ways to access those SIM cards and that data, and then obtain the SIM cards through the VIN number of the vehicle, and then use that SIM card information in order to track that vehicle in real time. So this is more innovative stuff that hasn't been used very frequently, but is on the horizon.
All right.
Switching
digital
devices. One of the big takeaways that I hope everybody gets from this presentation, this training that we're kind of putting on, is the idea that we're in a very digital world right now. That everything is electronic, and in that space, the devices have to communicate. So when we're talking about digital devices, and through this presentation and through the whole process of everything, I ask that you just kind of think, as you're walking around your day-to-day activities, what is it that you see or have access to that's electronic? What could it possibly contain? How does it communicate? What does that look like? And those are all potential sources of evidence or information that could be used to further a case or an investigation, both as it moves through. So as we move to outside of just our typical cell phones or iPads or tablet type of devices or home computers, which we traditionally think of, we also have the Internet of Things is a term. It's IoT. So this is going to be every little electronic device that we have that connects to the internet that in theory makes our life easier and simpler to work. So the saying that we have is with your Google Home, Siri, Alexa, all these different types of software programs or physical hardware devices that, again, will make us easier, right? To just talk out loud and say, hey, can you change the channel, adjust the thermostat? Well, those are all points of internet connection. And that's how it works, is this device will connect to the internet that will then connect back to whatever it is your request is looking at. So those are all going to be points of evidence, points of potential data that could help move your case forward. Refrigerators, again, we have crock pots, and just think through your kitchen for a moment. How many things in there have potential to connect to the internet? Stoves are one. All these sorts of things could be very good to say, wait a minute, was that person home or were they not? You can adjust your cell phone to say when you walk through the front door, your refrigerator will then remind you it's time to go to the grocery store because you're out of eggs. These are all possibilities. So that could definitely help to say, was this person home or not home? We can continue to look at watches, Fitbits, those are good, connect to different things. Home security systems, we're always kind of the low-hanging fruit, but what about your Ring doorbell systems or your different types of camera systems that will record both inside and outside? You have kids' toys, those baby monitors. We've seen those all on TV, right? How somebody is down the street and he's able to hack into the Wi-Fi to look inside your house through your baby monitor that's tucked away in a stuffed teddy bear. All that stuff is a reality. It's something that we need to look at and be aware of as we walk through a house, walk through our own places, what is available, what's not available, and where does that information go? Other sources of potential digital evidence or digital communications really is what we're talking about. Drones. Drones are becoming more and more prolific in everything we do, from the movie industry to the amateur photographer to just the person who enjoys flying a drone in the park. But what that also does, they collect information. Again, we're controlling a drone. We're going to put GPS points into it. We can map out, hey, I would like this drone to fly through this particular route, or I can have it track a vehicle. You know, these are all things that data has to be stored someplace. Some of your drones will contain information on board on its own hard drives, if you would. Others are going to have an external media source, like a flash card or an SD device that you can pull off and look at. We're also looking at license plate readers. We see those now on vehicles. You're going to see the big private sector towing companies or repo vehicles. There are definitely, as we're seeing, private companies that are installing your license plate readers or LPRs in private communities. So you go through your gated access into your private community and it's going to capture it. We have a local shopping mall here in town that when you pull into the parking garage, it takes a capture of your license plate, and then it will track you through the parking structure. So when you go to pay to get out, it'll tell you where your car is parked. It's parked on the east level, parking 3, space 82. It'll tell you all that sort of stuff. Again, that's all license plate readers. That information could be very, very valuable if you're looking for a location of a vehicle. Was somebody or was somebody not there? You know, moving on, we have gaming devices. I mean, the PlayStation 5 is going to come out, or just might have been released. It's something that these are not only computers in that space. I mean, you can communicate, you can store information, you can play videos. They're very, very powerful. So when we're thinking of digital evidence, we're thinking about digital communications, don't overlook or forget about some of these other devices that we have around our house, around our vehicles, that are in our life, that are becoming more and more prolific.
All right, so next, the next area that we're going to talk about real briefly, and I'm not going to spend too much time, but it is another source of digital evidence, and it's becoming a big source, particularly as we have encryption with phones, and we having a harder time getting into phones nowadays, is our vehicles. So traditionally with the vehicles, you would have the event data recorders, the black box in the vehicle that would record data related to the vehicle's speed, direction, things like that. It's continually recording data, so it's basically one of the things that it's hard to get data off of it that's particularly helpful, because it's often overriding itself, and sometimes it's not even activated until you have something like a crash. What's really helpful is the infotainment systems that we can get data off of vehicles. Basically what these infotainment systems are hardware and software in vehicles that provide the audio and video entertainment. So how many of you probably remember going to a rental car place, and most cars in a rental car place are newer cars, and they're going to have that infotainment system. And so you may want to plug your phone in so you can listen to your radio, but it'll also give you the option of basically syncing your contacts, syncing your music. I've had those where I've seen my texts show up on the screen, things like that. And then obviously not just in rental cars, but people's own personal cars. So these systems have become a big source of information for digital evidence that can help solve criminal cases. What kind of data can you get from these vehicles? When doors were open and closed? How would that be relevant? Well, you might have a situation where someone says, it was just me, I went and it was just me, and I just did this thing by myself. Yet the vehicle infotainment system shows that when the car stopped, 3 doors opened and 3 doors closed, all at the same time. or very close in time. That's going to show that that person's statement is not likely true. So all of these are different things, gear shifts, lights on and on, USB, Bluetooth connections, knowing which phones were in that car that made that Bluetooth connection can sometimes make or break a case. And so it's important to remember when you're thinking of digital evidence, you're not thinking of just the phones, you're not thinking of just the open source or the electronic records that you can get through the search warrant, or the IoT devices, or the gaming systems. Think about the cars. The cars are a potential huge source of information that we can get digital evidence off of. And sometimes you can get significant information that is also on the phone, but the phone, you can't get at it because it's locked, but you can get it off of the vehicle. All right, we're gonna now go from the idea, the topic that you first need to know what's out there. Now that you know that what's out there, and of course we did a broad overview of what's out there, how do you collect it properly? Obviously, you don't want to collect this information and then have it get thrown out before you can use it in your court case, or for if you're a government actor, if you can use it, whatever kind of proceeding you need to use it in. So you need to know how to collect it properly. There's generally two kinds of search warrants. I put them in two different kinds of categories. The general search warrant is going to be your search warrant to search a home, so, or a vehicle or an area. So that's where you're asking for a search to search that location for a mobile device or an IoT device. And then the specific kind of search warrant is going to be the search warrant to seize the data in that particular device. And so because of the type of probable cause that's needed for a general search warrant is going to be different than the type of probable cause needed to access the data in a particular device. Theoretically, you could put it all in one. I never recommend that. I always recommend doing the general first, seize the device. Then when you know what you have, then you can properly identify it and explain why you need to search that device. One of the big things, because we've talked, as Adam talked about with encryption, encryption's a big deal with phones these days. The phone companies have made it harder and harder for law enforcement to get into phones to get information out of them. And so one of the things you can do is think ahead and plan a few steps ahead. If you are in law enforcement or you're going into some sort of location in order to execute a general warrant, if to be able to preserve that data so that you don't get locked out by encryption. One is a request to be able to put in the warrant, in the general warrant, the request to be able to access any phones or devices that are found, to put them into airplane mode and turn off the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth, and to keep them powered on. These are things that, while the law requires, Riley versus California, which I can provide the site in the chat later, Riley versus California made it clear we need a search warrant to search a phone, but they also recognize you don't necessarily need it to access the phone to preserve it. So in order to put it into airplane mode and do these things that we need to do to preserve the phone, you don't necessarily need a warrant, but that doesn't mean it's not a good idea. If you have a planned takedown and you have a planned general search warrant, to go ahead and put that in there. There's also the possibilities, and I know some jurisdictions are already doing this, is in doing a general search warrant for a house or a vehicle, they're asking for the ability, the authorization to do an on-scene extraction to preserve the data, so that if they encounter any phones that are in an unlocked state, they can take those phones, take their Cellbrite machine or whatever machine that they're using to extract data, and do an on-scene extraction while it's still in an unlocked state, and then going back and doing a specific search warrant that satisfies the constitutional requirements for a search warrant for a particular device.
Sorry, having problems with the mute button today. So I wanted to talk about preservation of those records. specifically from your ISPs and social media accounts. The best thing to do, and I always recommend this to everybody, is to preserve that information as soon as you possibly can. We don't require any probable cause to do that preservation. There's many times on Google and on Facebook that I do the preservation myself. I'm not authorized in Colorado to write a search warrant, but I am authorized to issue a preservation request. I'll do that in lieu of giving it off to the detectives, mostly for time, or our investigators in the office. A lot of it's because of time. When I was at the police department, we would have our detective, maybe they went on vacation and I would find some information. I couldn't wait for them for 2 weeks to come back and hope that the account wasn't missing. Many times, most companies that are online now, you can issue those preservation requests online through some sort of portal. Google has a LERS portal. Facebook has a records portal that they can do that through. And if they don't have that, then a simple letter, or just the other day I had to request information on how to submit a preservation letter to a different company. They responded back with the correct email address in order to submit that to. So it's not real difficult, only takes a few minutes. And then that preserves that account for, depending on the company, up to about 3 to 6 months. That way you have time to figure out if you've got probable cause in order to get a search warrant. And then also you can extend it to if you're still working on that case.
Before moving on to the next thing, it's also important to preserve call detail records. There's precision location information that is collected by the carriers that is just, and Chris could tell you in a lot more detail, it's more valuable, it's more precise, hence the word precision location information. Because preservation doesn't require probable cause, if you're doing an investigation and you have a phone number, get that preservation in, because if it turns out that it's relevant, you want to be able to get it in during that period of time where they're still collecting and they're still preserving the precision location information. So this slide is kind of in an island unto itself because it deals with several different issues, but it's important to know some of the issues in victim witness devices and dealing with digital evidence as it is held in victim witness devices and accounts. So this is devices belonging to victims and uninvolved witnesses. There's going to be special privacy protections. So basically what you wouldn't want to have is a situation where you have a victim, say of a sex assault, and let's say there's some relevant information on that victim's phone, and you want to get that information off the phone so you have it in a good forensically sound manner. But if you have to extract the whole phone, which the technology generally requires, then you're potentially exposing the entirety of that victim's phone to discovery, and it could be completely irrelevant to the illegal issues in the case. So there's no necessarily correct answer for how to deal with this. There's just options. So one thing to remember is when someone consents, when you have a victim or a witness and they have a device, remember that what you see, if you're a prosecutor or you're law enforcement, you will have to provide it to the defense. And so it's just important to remember that. So when you're asking for consent, you may not want to ask for everything. You may want to choose to do just a screenshot of something because you don't want to expose your victim to the scrutiny that may come from a review of their entire device. You may want to have limited consent if necessary and if it's possible, and then make sure if you do that, you document the limitation. If an exam full extraction has already been done on a victim or a witness device, and there's information that you want to keep out of the hands of anybody else because it's essentially irrelevant to the criminal activity, but perhaps embarrassing, or just for whatever reason the person wants to keep it private, the attorneys can go to court and ask for a protective order for discovery purposes for that extra extraneous information. The last thing to note is some apps, and I know Snapchat was one, and I've heard that they have allowed you to fix this. I've heard back and forth, but just know that in some situations, if a photo is sent to someone and a victim takes a screenshot of it, that can notify the sender that a screenshot was taken. And you can imagine in like a domestic violence situation, that first thing that that person might think is, oh, they're at the police, they're taking a screenshot to provide that to the police, and that could exacerbate the situation. So be careful of screenshots. Sometimes it's better just to take if all you're dealing with is a screenshot as opposed to an extraction of the device, maybe take the screenshot with a separate camera as opposed to, or not a screenshot, take a picture of that screen with a separate camera. So the second topic we're talking about is how to properly collect the data. You can't go through this topic without talking about my favorite subject, which is search warrants. This is where I earn my bread and butter. And this is probably one of the most difficult areas of digital evidence nowadays in the courts. There's digital evidence, as I've learned, has required a combination of technical know-how, investigative work, and also legal know-how. And so you don't want to go through all this trouble of getting the information and then having it get thrown out because you didn't have a proper warrant. And so it's important to remember three aspects of, and I won't go into too much detail because this isn't a warrant class, but and with specifically as for digital evidence warrants, there's three things that have to be in every warrant under the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, and most likely every state constitution. And that's particularity of the location to be searched, particularity of the items to be seized, and probable cause to support a reasonable belief that the location to be searched will contain the items to be seized and that it's related to criminal activity or contraband. So starting first with the particularity of the location to be searched, this is the easy part. This essentially is where you're just saying, I want to search this phone. Now, it doesn't mean you can just say this phone. You want to identify the device to make sure that the person who's doing the actual extraction on that phone extracts the right phone. So you might want to list it by property invoice. You want to describe it. If you can get a serial number, that kind of thing. Sometimes you can't do that stuff without getting into the device. So sometimes you might want to say it's the black iPhone that was taken off of Joe Smith upon his arrest on such and such a date. It might be associated with a phone number. There's no one right way to do it, but it's just remembering that the thing that you need to do is make sure that you identify with particularity the device that you want to be searching so that the right device gets searched. If you're seeking records, again, this is the easy part. You want to identify the name and address of the business that you're seeking the records from. So if what you want is Facebook records, you just want to have Facebook, you want to have their address. I generally put their registered agent, if they have a registered agent in the state that I'm working in, which is Colorado. And then oftentimes they will have a law enforcement portal or an email address, and I indicate that I'm going to be serving process through that way. Search.org is a very good website that provides a significant amount of information regarding the service, the addresses, and service methods of service preferred by a lot of the ISP providers with their contact information. The second particularity is the tougher particularity, although I would actually suggest it's not as difficult as some people believe. The second particularity is the particularity of the data that you want to receive, the data that you're searching for. So we've already established we want, with particularity, want to search this particular phone. Now I have to say, this is the data I want to search for. It's not generally a good idea to list all the data on the phone without specifying the types of data. So what we have done is we have specified all the different types of data you can contain in the phone. And so, so some of that data, and I'll go real quick to this one slide, and I'll go back a little bit. You don't want to say any and all data. That's not going to be enough. All evidence of criminal activity, that's not going to be sufficiently particular. Those are things that could cause problems with facial particularity problems. So basically what you want to do is, whether it's for a device, you want to list all the data that you expect to receive out of that device that you want to be able to search through. if it's records, you want to tell Facebook, you want to tell Google, this is the data that I want you to provide to me. And you want to be particular. And so most of our warrants have a fairly long list because we want to be very specific about what we're asking for. If we're not specific enough, then either we won't get it or our warrant will be considered insufficient on the particularity prong. The most important part, I think, of any digital evidence warrant really is the probable cause. And probable cause is the same for digital evidence warrants as it is for any other warrant. It's reasonable grounds to believe that there's evidence of the criminal activity at the location to be searched and it is in the items to be seized. So again, when we go to any and all data is you're going to basically have to explain why any and all data, every single piece of data you could conceivably find on a phone is supported by probable cause. I show these connect the dots. That's what we call the nexus. You have to show a nexus between your criminal activity. So you're going to have your statement of probable cause, which are going to be the historical facts. And then you're going to have the list, the particular list of the data you want to seize. And you got to show the connection between why do I think that I will find evidence of this criminal activity in these particular areas. Some of that can be done based on specialized explanations by investigators that are uniquely trained in certain types of crimes. Sometimes it's based on general understandings of human behavior. But basically, you do have to make those connections in order for a warrant to be considered not overbroad. Essentially, what an overbroad warrant is you are asking to search for data for which you do not have probable cause. The last thing I'll say about particularity or probable cause is you do need to, if you're a prosecutor or you're an attorney and you're going to need to introduce this stuff introduce this data into evidence. And so you're going to need to attribute it and authenticate it. So the need to do that can often justify a broader search because you've got to show that that smoking gun text that shows, hey, he just confessed to committing a homicide. How do you know it was posted by him, or how do you know it was sent by him? Well, then let's expand and let's look at some of the other data in the phone to see, is this a pattern to text? Is it the way he phrases things? Is it the people he talks to? Those are all kind of things that can justify a broader search, this need for attribution and authentication. And the last part about search warrants I will mention is one of the things to know for search warrants for records, internet service providers are generally covered under the Stored Communications Act, which is a federal statute, and it's covered under 18 U.S.C. 2701 et seq. So you'll have 2703 is going to be the meat of it. Basically, what that governs is requests for records from electronic service providers, internet service providers. And one of the nice things that they have in that is an order for non-disclosure. If you're conducting an investigation, you're not going to want your target to know that you have just submitted a warrant for their information. And so because the Stored Communications Act requires disclosure of those warrants, in the absence of an order for non-disclosure, you're going to want to get that order. Can also consider certain things, order not to cancel an account. Some companies might cancel an account of a particular customer if they're getting several warrants from the police. That would obviously tip off the person that they may be under investigation. Order to seal is something, and order to delay notifications are also things to prevent the investigation from being made known to the target.
All right, moving on.
I'm going to cover in topic 3 here, kind of what you need to know on how to search and seize the data. Primarily with this section, I'm going to talk about physical cell phone devices, but please keep in mind that a lot of this will be applicable to computers or iPads, Series, Xboxes, those types of things. So I'm just going to focus primarily again on the cell phone itself, the physical device. So when we're looking at collecting this information, we just need to figure out, you know, what it is that we're doing. Do we have the legal authority, the legal ability to be there? Do we have the search warrants in place? Is it gonna be a consent search of that device? Is it gonna be something abandoned property? What are we looking at? So we gotta make sure we're on the correct legal standing first and foremost before we go diving into a device and how we're looking at handling it. So when we first get the device, it's in whatever state that it's in. You know, some of the considerations that we need to look at are, do we keep that device in a powered on state? Do we keep it in a powered off?
Sorry.
There you go, you're good. So yeah, do we want to keep it in a powered on position? There's a lot of value in doing that as far as the data collection down the road. Yes, we are aware that the device will be behind some type of password lock or a PIN lock, a swipe lock. But we can still have, using some advanced techniques, we can still have the potential to get some of that information out. As I'm going through talking about cell phones, I just want to kind of back up 10,000 foot view. What we have primarily, we're going to be talking about iOS devices. So iOS is an operating software that's through Apple. So these could be your Apple iPhones. The other major one in the game right now that we're seeing is Android. Android is going to be another operating software. Now, Androids can be loaded onto a litany of different brands: Samsung, LG, ZTE, the list goes on and on. You'll also see that on a lot of your knockoff phones coming from overseas. That'll be kind of purchased off of eBay or something like that, a garbage phone that an individual can then load an operating software and stuff onto it. So that's gonna be Android. So when I'm talking about iOS and Android devices, that's what I'm gonna be referring to generally. So we're looking at the device. What is it that we have? Do we wanna keep it powered on? Do we wanna shut it off? If we keep it powered on, we could get good information off of it. But there's also, if we shut it off, we can preserve the battery. We can also preserve some evidence that is gonna be on it. So it's a decision that has to be made kind of phone specific. And I always will default back to whatever your agency's policies and procedures are as far as phone collection and evidence collection. Start with that, and then do your own research and reach out to experts in the field and the community to kind of see what the current trends are. Things are always changing with cell phones, as we just learned this morning with the new release of iOS 14. So things are always changing. So nothing is static in this world. You'll hear the word depends a lot, and it depends on too many variables to talk about. So it's hard to give definitives. One of the things also we're looking at is we're going to separate the device from the network. Let me switch. So we're talking about separating the device from the network. We're going to be looking at disabling Bluetooth, Wi-Fi connections. Has it connecting to the world? Is it connecting through a cell phone tower? Is it connecting through a phone router? These are things that we're looking at. We want to make sure we disconnect that communication because data is being transmitted back and forth. There's always a possibility of a user remote wiping it. There's the potential of a device just through its own application nature, having a time sensitive piece of information that as soon as it connects to the network, Facebook is a great example of this, right? If it's not connected to Facebook, we can see what's going on. As soon as it connects to Facebook, your screens, your walls, everything's going to update. So if we're trying to collect and preserve evidence, we need to be aware of that network connection. So some of the other conditions that affect our ability to search a device, you know, what about a screen? Everything that we have is touch screen now. What if that screen is cracked or shattered? Are you still able to operate or use that device to extract information? Or are you going to have to maybe reach out to somebody to repair that screen first before you do that? Again, these are things that we need to be considerate of as we're looking at obtaining that information. What do we need to articulate in an additional search warrant maybe? Is it something that in our notes we need to articulate, yes, this is the way the device came in, this is how I fixed it, and then I was able to get that information. Network connection, again, going back to disabling Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. What happens if on some of our Android devices, You can't do that because you have to have the password to disable it. So then what do we do? Well, there's certain things. A Faraday bag is a brand that contains a bag. It's like a Ziploc bag where you just put the device into it and it isolates it from network connectivity. But those can get expensive. We've seen pretty good success just getting your heavy gauge, your thick aluminum foil, and just keeping sheets of that, wrap a phone up in it 2 or 3 times. That does a pretty good job of actually isolating it from the network. Again, we're trying to break that connection and preserve what is on the device from any outside influences. And one of the things that also gets overlooked a lot when we talk about devices, particularly when we're recovering them from crime scenes, but also from individuals, is are there any hazards associated with that? Biological, chemical hazards? Is it something that we're recovering it from a deceased individual who, there's blood or biological fluids on that? We need to be aware of that because, one, that can affect the examiner and those of us that are collecting it. We want to be aware of that. But then also it can have potential damaging to the device itself. You can start to have corrosion start to come into play if the device was recovered in a gutter after a rainstorm. What does that look like? How do we preserve that? Or if it was recovered from a place where a fire occurred. We see the fire retardants. That's the stuff the fire department sprays down to put out a fire. But we're also talking electronic devices. So how do we be aware of what that looks like and the damage it's doing to the device? Again, trying to preserve the evidence so we can meaningfully extract it. And then another thing, just last, I always want to touch on is potential for DNA and fingerprinting. Is this something that the device is going to be fingerprinted or DNA samples taken from? If that fits the case or fits the nature of what it is that you're investigating, again, consulting your local experts on that, but you may want to do a DNA swab of the device first or dust it for fingerprints first before we go into trying to do an extraction on it, because we don't want to destroy other evidence in order to get current evidence. So now that we kind of got the device in hand, how are we going to extract the data? There's various software vendors out there. I primarily use Cellebrite. I've used Oxygen and some of those others. I'm by no means endorsing any of them. I would definitely say go out, test them, see what fits your agency, your budget. There's very good. They're all really good. You're not going to have a bad system. So we'll attempt to unlock the device. A lot of the systems can do what's called either a brute force, or they'll try and physically bypass the PIN code, the lock codes. Older devices tend to be easier just because the complexity of the passcodes is simpler. It's something that these devices, these software programs that we use can open those devices up. Once we get our device unlocked, we're going to get generally 3 different types of extracted data. And I put a caveat with a 4th on the screen, as you guys can see. And I'll just kind of go across it. So the first is going to be a logical type of extraction. That's going to be basically the simplest level. It's going to be the low-hanging fruit, if you would, to use a tree analogy. It's going to be fast. There's not going to be any decoding required by the software. It's very easy to obtain. The downside of that, though, is we're looking at limited data. And when I talk about limited data, we're going to be talking about very much like your call logs, contacts, text messages, videos, photos, the things that are native to that phone. So it'll be text messages that'll be sent through the native messaging service. We're not talking application data at this level. Then we're going to have to go a little bit deeper if we want to start to get that. And this is where the depend statement kind of comes in, right? Everything on each device, each operating software, each update is going to vary on what we can get as far as the level of information and data we can pull off the devices. So the next level we're going to be looking at is going to be a file system. What this is going to be doing is going to be copying a device's full file system. So think of we had the filing cabinet back in one of the earlier slides. Think of it as you're taking all the files out of that filing cabinet and running it through a copy machine. That's going to be effectively what a file system extraction is going to do. It's going to be pretty quick. It's going to be a little bit slower than a logical. You're going to get a lot more information, and the complexity now is going to start to increase. This is where encryption is going to start to come into play, various application information, what's encrypted, where is it housed, the decoding. This is where your software programs will start to come into play, the ability to decode certain things versus others. And then we keep moving down the line. We got the physical. This is going to be your most complete type of an extraction. It's a bit for bit copy of the internal memory. So again, using that filing cabinet, we're going to make a photocopy of everything in there, but then we're also going to capture or attempt to capture all the paper clips that fell on the floor and behind, and all the old things that are on the bottom of that filing cabinet that might have been overlooked in the file system. That's where the physical is going to get. You're going to get some database information that traditionally wouldn't be available, or some deeper log files that can show the activities of the phone. The challenge is it's very time consuming. It can take several hours for physical extraction to occur on a device. It's going to require a lot of decoding by the software manufacturer, which they're very, very good, all of them, on staying up to date and pushing out updates. But it's a physical, so you're getting a lot of information. And with that, the flip side of that is it takes a lot of time, and you may or may not. You're also going to start to get unallocated, deleted information that a user might have thought was deleted, but because of the way the memory on the devices work, that information may still be present. And then last but not least, what we have is it's very often overlooked and not addressed, but just a manual extraction. And this is exactly what it sounds like. This is holding the device in your hand and clicking on the Facebook app, and it opens up and you take a picture of it. This is what you see. This is literally using your hands to manually go through the device and capturing what you see. It's there. It holds a lot of value because sometimes there is going to be applications that none of our software programs have the ability to decrypt or have the ability to parse out, which is put the pieces back together, if you would. But if we have access to the phone, well, we can just look at it there and take a picture of it. It's also very good for verifying or validating the information that we got. If I can see on a manual extraction a text message string between two individuals, and then I go and look at my file system extraction, is that communication string there? If it is, that's a pretty good validate that I got a good extraction. If it's not, as an examiner, I need to go back and figure out why didn't I get that information? Is it feasible? Is it an error? Or is it something just not possible with that application or that device? Just real quick, I'll touch on just some of the file system. I'll back up 1 second real quick. The file system, that's going to start to get Bluetooth information, GPS information, bookmarks, type of internet browsing history. So when I talk about deeper information, deeper data that we're gathering as we're going down the line, that's kind of the information that I'm referring to. So now moving forward, we have advanced extraction options. So there's a couple vendors. These are, again, not exclusive to them. There's others out there. I just didn't list. I just didn't have space for it. Grayshift and Cellebrite are right now kind of the big kids in the playground. They have the ability to perform advanced extractions on passwords that generally are going to be much harder to crack or break open. Grayshift currently is iOS only, so they don't have the ability to do Android type of devices. One of the things that you'll hear, the terminology that's now really starting to be prevalent when we're doing extractions is it's a BFU, which stands for before first unlock, or an AFU, which is after first unlock. So what we're doing is we're being able to extract information in a before first unlock, information that is sitting at the level that's not encrypted. This is going to be maybe sometimes boot up information. It could be general pictures. You can get sometimes location information. That's going to be very device and operating system specific. And after first unlock is going to be very similar to a file system extraction. It's using advanced capabilities to decrypt a password and then move through it. This is something where keeping the device powered on is very important to do, because if a device powers off or cycles off, it goes back to its default native encryption protection space, and we're unable to use or leverage an AFU capability. Again, both Grayshift and Cellebrite have these abilities, and it's something that is very valuable and nice. Cellebrite also has the option that you can send a device back to their advanced services that they can also help out to try and extract more information. Downside of these software packages and services is obviously a cost mechanism to it. Not to say that these are the only exclusive ones. If you have an older device, if you have an unlocked device, particularly an Android, there's free software out there, and Driller is one that you can use. You can work on it to try and unlock devices or pull a large portion of information off the device. So it's, again, I encourage you to reach out to whoever your local forensic examiners are in the area, reach out to the community to kind of see what is best suited for your needs, what is available, what's not. In this world, it's ever advancing and it's always changing. So it's not vendor or brand specific. It's more the knowledge base is what we're after. And then when we can't pull stuff off, there is some JTAG ISP. What this is we're gonna literally connect cables to the circuit board on a JTAG and ISP and attempt to pull the data directly from the chipset off of the information. This is phasing out with encryption at the chipset level by most of the manufacturers now. However, on a lot of your Boost mobile or your disposable $20 Walmart phones, this is something that can still be very good. They're not going to invest the money into the chip level encryption for that type of a product. The next level is a chip off. This is going to be a destructive. It's quite literally, we're going to take the chip and we're going to sand it and cut it off of the main board in an attempt to then clone or mirror out the data, the ones and zeros that are on that chip, and then reconstruct it. And if that doesn't work, I always like to throw in the nuclear option, which is just beat it with a hammer, because at that point you're so frustrated and you're done, and just throw it in a filing cabinet drawer and wait for another year before maybe some new technology comes out. So then once we get all of our information, what we're looking at is a way, how do we read it? How do we understand the sheer volume of data that we have, the information? How do we decipher it? What's good, what's bad, what's applicable to our case? 99.9% of most things that we recover from a phone are valuable to a case, but they're not that smoking gun that we're looking for. It's not the whodunit text message type of thing. So your different software vendors, here I have a screen capture of Cellbrite, their physical analyzer. They also have a reader program that also shows it. But what you can do is you can just kind of just click on the calls, and it'll give you a list of all the calls. It'll click on the text messages. It'll give you a list of text messages. This is something that we can generate reports from that can then help in the case filing and the case investigation as it moves forward. It's something that you can granularly search, or you can generate it out. And what we're seeing is, historically, there used to be a trend of just generating reports with an Adobe PDF. That is really going wayside just because of the size. It's not uncommon to have an Adobe PDF of a cell phone extraction in the 40 to 50,000 page range, well into the hundreds of thousands of pages, depends upon the phone. So these software programs are very valuable in actually going through, analyzing, digesting, and finding usable information to help facilitate and move the case forward.
So this is Chris again, and as we this is a good segue into what my piece will be next week when I speak more about how do we search the records, how do we analyze the records, and what can we do with the records once we receive them. A couple of points that I want to kind of hit on at the outset is, please preserve the accounts or the data as soon as possible, and then submit the search warrant after that. That really helps with the analysis of the information, because I can take a look and see if I can verify if things were deleted, or and we can use that at trial later on, or for the investigation. And then when we talk next week, we're going to talk about subjecting the returns that we get back to some sort of tool that's going to ingest the data, provide it in a more readable form. What Adam just showed you with the Cellbrite return or the Cellbrite report is good for that one phone. We'll talk about, what do you do if you've got 4 or 5 phones? What do you do if you've got phones and Facebook and Google and so on? We want some sort of tool that's going to ingest that information that we can go through and properly analyze the data, and then look for all of those pieces of information that are going to relate back to your case. With that, we also, there's a difference, so you want to also kind of keep this in mind. There's also a difference working at the initial outset of the crime at the investigative level, when detectives or your investigators are looking at the crime and they're looking at the information they find, and then what is actually relevant to a trial. Those are sometimes 2 different pieces, because the investigators are interested in identifying their suspect, getting them into custody so they can't cause any more problems. But when we go to trial, there may be other information that's in there that is going to help show to the jury why it is that we're looking at this person. One last thing, and I'm going to hit on this a little bit next week as well. There is no such thing as too much data. If you've got somebody that can analyze the data properly, the amount of data is somewhat irrelevant to me. When lawyers or when investigators say, "Oh, we're going to have 50 or 60,000 lines of data within this," I know how to filter that out, how to look for the information that's going to be relevant, and look for the signal that's within the noise. So that's going to be a part of next week as well.
Well, I want to thank Cathee, Chris, and Adam for a very informative presentation. I just want to double check, see if any of you have any sort of wrap-up thoughts you want to offer, and also find
Sorry
out from.
about that. I just wanted to leave with some final thoughts. As I indicated, we are going to have a second part where we're going to talk a lot about the analysis of the data, and then also the natural culmination of all this data, which is using it at trial. And so some ways to use that data in a more efficient manner, and because a lot of people are visual learners, and it can be really persuasive evidence if you use it right. But with the end of this, I'm not going to go through all the slides to get to the last one. You'll get the PowerPoint. The final thoughts I have is just, when you're looking at a case, if you're an investigator, if you're a prosecutor, if you're a law enforcement officer, or whatever role you have where this might come up and this might be some of your work, consider what type of evidence is available that might be available in your particular set of facts. Something's going to be relevant for some kind of crimes, and some's going to not be relevant for some kind of crimes. What is the source of that evidence? You need to know what the source is so you know how and where to go to get it. Do you have access to the evidence, or do you need a warrant for it? In that kind of situation, you may have access to the evidence, such as you have the phone, or you may need a warrant to get the cloud backup. So these are the kind of things you want to think about. And then what is the extent of the search that's authorized by your facts? You may not get everything you want to get because you just don't have enough facts yet. So make sure that you're not overreaching and asking for more than you have probable cause for, and then you should be okay. So we look forward to meeting with you guys next time in a week from now, when we expect to be able to do part 2. And thank you for spending your lunch hour with us.
Thank you. Well, it's certainly legal to end early, but I just want to give folks one last chance for any questions while we have such a distinguished panel with us. Okay, well, that's it. I know the three of you must be incredibly busy, so I'll thank you for your time, and we look forward to next Friday at the same time.
Thank you.